You know, this is so beautiful. The birth of great ones. And it is even more astonishing to realize the truth behind their words, that the same light shines in everybody, in each of us. I mean, come to think of that, Yogananda ji used to say that people see suffering. He says, it is more now, you might say, because we have come out of Kali Yuga. Once, this is a dark age. Once I was giving a lecture and I told people that, that we are in Kali Yuga, or we were in Kali Yuga, and now we are in the transitioning period into Dwapara, which the transition is over. We are now into Dwapara proper, but still, Swami used to say those tendencies of Kali Yuga are still, putting up a very strong fight. And he said, you can see it everywhere. And I said, we face so much strife nowadays. And somebody in the audience protested, no, I think history has always been the same. There have always been war. Maybe we are becoming more aware of it because media has come into play. Well, it has some truth, yes, but Master said this is a time of strife. In the future it will not be like that. And I want to today talk a little bit about Yogananda ji's guru, Sri Yukteswar, who contributed to our understanding. And I think in time, inevitably, millions and millions of people will thank this great soul for simply putting out his knowledge of the yugas to us. Because till we know which part of the cycle we are in, we often don't know what to expect. So many times we expect things from children or other people. They are not even mature to deliver. They may not even know what we are expecting. And as a doctor, I'm intrigued about the brain, and I read an article where it said that the teenager's brain, the body grows, but the brain is trying to catch up for a few years. So you may see a big child or a grown-up and say, can't you understand? And the truth is the child cannot understand because he or she does not have that experience, and their brain is not able to process the way you are processing, or the logic you are trying to convince them by. They are not understanding. And Sri Yukteswar ji said that we have come out of this age of Kali Yuga, which is just 1200 years, come to think of it. Dwapar, he says 2400 years, which is the next higher age. Treta, 3600 years. And Satyuga, 4800 years ascending, and then 4000 descending. Imagine life in Satyuga. Those are 10,000 years right there. Ascending and descending. Such options, such possibilities, such a knowledge. When they will look back in their ascent and descent too, they will look back and see that the goal of life is but finding joy. Yogananda ji said also mankind's age, lifespan increases that way. 100 years is considered to be a great achievement in Kali Yuga. 200 years will not be unusual, he says, by the end of these 2400 years. And we are already seeing a trend in that direction. He says 300 years is very ordinary and common in Treta. And 400 years to find God. To live in a company where Master said everybody is looking for that. Imagine that. So God's generosity, God's kindness, His plans, let's accept it. Our brains are simply too small to even question. It's good to question, but we need the explanation of a God-realized Master, a Guru. And Yogananda ji said his Guru, Sri Yukteswar ji, was one such light. Master said in time, people will come to see his life and his contribution. They will declare him. He said the Gyan avatar for this age of Dwapara. What a beautiful knowing. So let me go into the depth a little bit of what Sri Yukteswar ji's life was. Master, of course, we read this beautiful chapter. There are two very outstanding chapters in autobiography. Each chapter is unique, but two really nice ones where in one of them Master describes his 10 years of life, time spent in his guru's ashram. He says, years in my master's hermitage. And that's where we all took a mental journey this evening. We all visualized. I often like to visualize myself, especially if my energy is down. I ask myself, where, if Sri Yukteswar ji was around, or if I was in his ashram, could I do this? And the answer comes very fast. Could I behave like this? He was very particular about certain things. Also, Master says that at some point after Sri Yukteswar ji's passing, by the way, for those who may not know, Sri Yukteswar ji's picture is the second from your right. And Sri Yukteswar ji appeared in the body after his body had been buried in Puri. He appeared a few days later in a hotel in Mumbai from where Yogananda ji was to depart from America. And Master, when he asked him, "Sir, am I dreaming?" Sri Yukteswar ji invited him with open arms to come and touch. And he says, as I knelt at his feet, as I embraced him, I could feel this was a real body. And his guru explained him. Again, something I think which people, scientists, everybody who's afraid of death, everyone, which means we will come to understand that death simply, as Krishna promises in the Gita, simply does not exist. So to see life from the eyes or the understanding of a saint is very important, I think, for us. And we are slowly, as people question, they're coming to realize the importance of the lives of great saints. And that's where I started. It is so wonderful that these opportunities are given to us. When I came on the path, I was so happy there were 5 masters, because there is all the more opportunity. Once somebody came to our temple and he said, "Oh, but you don't have a lady on the altar. What about the motherly presence?" And I said, just stick around. You'll find all the motherly and paternal, maternal blessings right here. I said, they are there for a reason. Yes, of course, ladies have their place. I said, but in our line of gurus, this is how they came. And I said, but you will find everything over here. It's not a lopsided path. And anyway, when do we come to appreciate or ask, need the guidance of God? Because it is very astonishing how God comes into everybody's life. You can visualize, go back home and today think of that unique moment in history, in your own life, where a teaching, a friend, a book, a blessing, a dream must have come to you. So it makes us believe that God is watching everything. And then how does he act? Master says, above all, he acts through the channel of a clear channel of a guru. And Yogananda ji said that a guru does not try to make us a Xerox copy of himself. The best example is Yogananda ji and Sri Yukteswar ji. Sri Yukteswar was a declared Jnana avatar, and Yogananda ji said he was a bhakti, he had devotion. And he says both of them, of course, were Kriyavans, they used to practice Kriya. But Master says, being in the presence of my guru brought out the devotion in me, made me myself. It's a very interesting principle of magnetism, because often we may think the energy we have is the kind of energy, we will reflect and draw. But what is this energy we are talking about? We are talking of soul. The soul cannot be duplicated. That energy is very unique. So when a self-realized soul comes around anybody, what he or she will bring out of others is their soul nature, and a beautiful journey. And Master said that in the beginning, because we are accustomed from our birth to go out, that's how the physical birth and universe and life is. He says we go out and out and out. He says still we are either deeply disappointed, or by our discrimination we come to understand this is only going in circles. This is not helpful. This may not end in deep understanding of life or death. And at that time, he says, when we start questioning, or think of yourself when you'll be most tired, what is the first thing you do? You seek physical rest. At that time, you may close your eyes. You may not talk to people. You go into silence. You eat little sometimes. All these things, Yogananda ji's guru said, are universal means of withdrawal. One time, one of his very interesting contributions was Sadhu Sabha, which is gathering of saints, leaders. He used to request leaders of different sects, organizations, groups, invite them at his place, maybe visit theirs, and they would have a discussion. What each of them is practicing is just the same, is the same scientific basis. He says it is not a question of doubt or a question of dogma. He says this is how it is. God has made us in a certain way, and there is only a certain way in which we can find Him, but yet it is not duplicated. All disciples, he would say, of the same Guru are also different. As we discover our journey, he says, you will be thrilled beyond your imagination. He strongly suggested pranayam, kriyabans. And he says pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is the beloved Lord Himself. What is pranayam? Let's discuss that. Our physical body, it has now been understood, is a manifestation of energy. It is that energy which I was saying goes missing or depleted when we go too far out through the senses into the world. We lose a touch of our inner peace. That treasure, that force that comes into us is depleted. And diseases come, mental agony comes, disappointments, expectations, fears. And Sri Yukteswar said, that's because you have let it all pass. He says, if on the other hand, you start gathering it inside, by pranayama, raising that energy inside of us, it is in the spine, bringing it, he says, to the point between the two eyebrows, through the brain. As we bring energy, summon it back into our spine, our body, he says, every fiber is healed. Every muscle cell is beyond joy. I was reading this morning that Swami Ananda ji said in one of the extracts, he says, ordinary people think they are strong. He says, they are, everybody is strong to some degree. But he said, my own father, who he said I looked up to, when old age came, he said, used to weep because he could not lift himself from the bed, could not lift himself if he fell down. Now we would accept that as the fate of most people. Well, it happened to Swamiji too. But did he weep? No. He says, if at all, we weep out of sheer joy. He says, by that time in a saint's life, what happens to the body is simply of no concern. I can give you an example. Once he went for open heart surgery, somebody asked him later, so how was it? The simple reply was, I went in bliss, I have come out in bliss. He was here in Pune for kidney failure. Amarji was overseeing him, his wife was overseeing him, quite a life-threatening condition. And he was put in the ICU and the doctors were watching him, but they would come once in a while to see through the window, small peek through the door. Many doctors came and they said, look at this patient. He's beaming. His kidneys are failing, his body is not working, he's got 20 surgeries, he's suffered cancer. He's beaming. That's because the joy, the pranayama, that's the fruit of pranayama. And Sri Yukteswar ji said, when we bring the energy up, and you see what is increasing. You may say, well, but my body is failing. Of course it has to fail. It is very basic understanding that this plane does not support anybody for long enough. Babaji is an exception. It does not support anybody. But when we bring the energy up, Yogananda ji said, and his guru said, what changes is your awareness, your knowledge, your consciousness, your intuition. When we project it out of the spiritual eye, there cannot be another way. Are we saying God is haphazard? He made somebody this way, this may not work for others. Why do we serve others? Our awareness goes beyond ourselves. For the saints, it is like air. You will die without service. Why do you do devotion? Because naturally the love is rising. You're coming to realize a reality which is so much bigger and non-disappointing, non-dual than anything the world has even shown us in the best examples. So that love keeps multiplying, keeps growing. And Yogananda ji's Guru Sri Yukteswar said it is the consciousness which finally, he says, merges with infinity itself. It comes to realize that eons ago, it was set into motion on the physical plane, other planes, and those things can get very theoretical, even discouraging. But as we practice, as we meditate, we understand that I'm going in the right direction. I also want to share a few things about Sri Yukteswar ji's unique contributions. I mentioned yugas, the theory of yugas, that he brought us to that understanding that, again, the cycles of time are not haphazard. It is intended by God. In duality, when God creates things, everything is in duality. So there is an ascending, there is a descent. And he says those who would benefit from these trends would make much more progress. What were some of the trends he suggested? Well, first of all, by the way, this was about 120, I think maybe 10 years ago, when he proposed the theory of the yugas, and his way was to take a procession out with the other monks and boys. And what happened? People started throwing stones on them. They were in the city of Puri, very ancient, and Sri Yukteswar ji was declaring, we are in Dwapar age. People threw stones at him. Then he also drew a lot of criticism in his time, because through a book, The Holy Science, in 1894, he showed that the underlying teachings of Christianity and Hinduism are the same. Again, a lot of flack. The missionaries were very aghast. The Hindus were very perplexed by this sort of even comparisons. But Yogananda ji said, but that is what he showed, that no matter what people are doing, it can be deduced to this universality, the science of religion. He also, through these sadhu sabhas I was saying, proved that everybody is looking for the same thing. Another very interesting fact about Sri Yukteswar's life was he was very scientific in his approach when it came to the day-to-day practicalities of, let's say, food. He suggested, and I'll read a passage over here, where in his past life, They say he was Lanfranc, and there was a rule in his monastery that only when somebody was very ill would they get some meat. And while they were eating meat, they had to stay in a separate room, not mix with other people. But the first thing that amazed me was 800 years ago in Europe, he had a vegetarian monastery. That is a very, I think, big accomplishment, maybe one of its kind, because it was common practice at that time to eat, which is fine. Master says that was the practice of Kali Yuga, but Sri Yukteswarji had the wisdom and the power to initiate a new thing. He also said that by the use of proper company of, Guru Bhais, places of pilgrimage, communities, also bangles, he proposed that everything is conscious. You see, not just our body, everything. And he says pure things, pure heart, pure metals, pure gemstones beyond 2 carats. He says when they are worn next to our body, it helps us. Now, on the yogic path, it is very interesting to see that when God creates us, it is from the inside out. So on one level, our astrology, our challenges, our tests, it can be very easily predicted. Once Swamiji, at a young age, he found a chart where it was predicted which people and what tests more or less he will meet in his life. And Swami says it just came out to be that way. How? His death was also predicted in that, and he says because everything was true, maybe my death will also be true when he was 83. But then his death was delayed, and that's a whole different story. But how does somebody know that a certain event or a certain person is going to meet you in your life? That is because all those energy patterns are already inside of us. I will not go into detail, but we have an astral body, we have an energy pattern over there. And Master Sri Yukteswar, they firmly believe that it is that which plays out into this body and into our environments, why we are born at a certain time, in a certain family, in a certain place. These all have very deep but simple implications, scientific implications of what are we trying to do. So he also said that there are a few things which can overcome the patterns which are suggested in our charts. One of them, he said, is willpower. He says for willpower, there is no upper limit. And his foremost disciple Yogananda ji proved that. Master says, I used to choose my worst periods in the astrology and at that time find the hardest things to do. And he said, of course, it was achieved by great difficulty, but he said, I would achieve it. Another thing, Guru's grace. Once you have a Guru, especially our line of Gurus, I would say, because the mission they have brought is not a status quo right now, it is a beginning work. And it is very important for us to share, act as channels in different ways to spread this understanding. People go through life without any understanding. They lament. Somebody once asked Sri Yukteswarji, will I be spared of the bad effects of karma because I didn't know that the law of karma exists? He said, my son, this universe would be fairly chaotic if it depended on the will and the whims of each person. Yogananda ji's explanation was, he says, if you are driving a car absent-mindedly and you hit into a tree, will your punishment or will your injury be any less than if it was intentional? He says rules apply and ignorance is part of the problem. Saint Patanjali was very firm about this. He says, if you are in ignorance, correct it. It is your problem. Figure it out. Ultimately, this seems very hard on God's part, but ultimately Master says when you realize you are not even the creator of your ego, that's a very Jnana approach, but a very valid, true, the only approach. He says then you understand that when you do understand what is life all about, you cannot help ultimately. That is the only way to find God. You cannot help but surrender every action, thought. Swami says you will find God only when every thought is drenched with God, when every act is for God. He says in the beginning we start by thinking of Him once in a few hours. Then he says few minutes. He says ultimately every action must be performed in that consciousness. So it was beautiful. I chose today deliberately not to go through the regular stories of Sri Yukteswar's life, which you can always read in Autobiography of a Yogi, but do read them. His teachings especially are profound, few but very profound. I want to read a very amusing extract over here. Now it's slightly long, about Lanfranc. This chapter is called Chapter 7. This book we still do not have in India, but it is about Yogananda ji once mentioned towards the end of his life that he was King William the Conqueror in the past, about 800 years ago. And Swamiji said that it intrigued me to explore because he's known as a very great villain. So Swami says that I was quite perplexed that my guru, how could he play a villainous role? So he said I really went to the depth of it, and I realized that he had to perform some very strong acts in his time, but they were for the welfare. And he says, it's a very interesting book, Two Soul, Four Lives, and he shows how some of the actions, many of the actions Master took in that lifetime, today is the basis of governments worldwide. It is for the environment also many things he did, spirituality, and very, very interesting study of their lives. But this chapter is about William and his General Lanfranc. And Swami, towards the end of his life, wrote in the book Biography that Master said that Sri Yukteswar ji was Lanfranc. He was a monk and he was also my general. So let's see how they both met at that time. It's a comparative study between this life and the other. From Autobiography of a Yogi. Passing an inconspicuous lane, I turned my head and surveyed the narrow length. A Christ-like man in the ochre robes of a Swami stood motionless at the end of the road. Instantly and anciently familiar he seemed. My gaze fed hungrily for a trice. Then doubt assailed me. You are confusing this wandering monk with someone known to you, I thought. Dreamer, walk on. After 10 minutes, I felt heavy numbness in my feet. The saint is magnetically drawing me to him. Retracing my steps as though wing-shod, I reached the narrow lane. My quick glance revealed a quiet figure steadily gazing in my direction. A few eager steps and I was at his feet. Gurudeva. The divine face was none other than he of my 1,000 visions. Those eyes, the leonine head with pointed beard and flowing locks had oft peered through gloom of my nocturnal reveries, holding a promise I had not fully understood. On my own, oh my own, oh my own, you have come to me. My guru uttered the words again and again in Bengali, his voice tremulous with joy. How many years I have waited for you. We entered a oneness of silence. Words seemed the rankest superfluities. Eloquence flowed in soundless chant from heart of master to disciple. With an antenna of irrefragable insight, I sensed that my guru knew God and would lead me to him. The obscuration of this life disappeared in a fragile dawn of prenatal memories. Dramatic time, past, present, and future are its cycling scenes. This was not the first sun to find me at these holy feet. Our souls met after years of waiting. They trembled with an omnipresent thrill. We met here because we had met before. We had met before. This was not the first sun to find me at these holy feet. Now this is the author saying, how did Lanfranc and William meet? We have no exact information regarding their first face-to-face meeting, but below is the story of their first recorded direct interaction. Lanfranc, now this is a very complicated story where Master in that life marries a very distant cousin of his, which is against the tradition of those times, and the Pope is upset. And then Lanfranc has to intervene and make things right. Lanfranc was prior of Bec and already well known in Normandy and elsewhere, where the issue arose of Duke William's recent marriage to Matilda of Flanders, who was a distant cousin of William's. Since in those days, questions of who should be married to whom was strongly in the minds of church leaders, and since Lanfranc was very keen on reducing the number of married priests, and actually anything at all along those lines, it was only natural for him to agree with the Pope, who had decided that William should not have married Matilda. It wasn't long, of course, before William heard this news, and so he sent a house chaplain, a man by the name of Herfast, to Bec to speak to Lanfranc and try to get the most famous teacher in Normandy to see the light. Herfast turned out to be an unwise choice for his task. For one thing, he was rough, unpolished, and illiterate. In addition, it appears that Herfast was jealous of the prior. And Lanfranc, like Sri Yukteswar 800 years later, was a keen judge of men and a reader of hearts. It was therefore impossible in this situation for Lanfranc to respect either her fast or his message. The story goes that Lanfranc greeted her fast by handing him an ABC primer and asking the chaplain to read it to him. Bubbling over with wrath, her fast returned to Rouen, which is the place, and implored William to banish Lanfranc from his duchy, which is the small place. After due reflection, William agreed and sent word to Beck. To make his message abundantly clear, the Duke ordered the burning of a farm that belonged to Beck Abbey, and Sri Yukteswarji was the head monk of that place. Lanfranc received the Duke's command and got busy setting his affairs in order. He put his few belongings in a bag, and after tying it to the back of the most miserable horse in the abbey's stable, rode slowly in the direction of Rouen. Followed by a servant, the prior made his leisurely way out of Normandy. Now, along his route, Lanfranc just happened to run into the Duke, which is Master William, and his retinue. They rode along the road together. After a time, William commented. By the way, the author shares over here that it is no coincidence that in this life also they met in the street in a certain way, and how magnetically probably they both knew they're going to meet each other on the way, again on the roads. They rode along the road together. After a time, William commented, "I thought you were going to leave Normandy. As you can see, Your Grace, I'm trying. I'd leave much more quickly if you could find me a decent horse." William laughed. Then he began to sound out Lanfranc on various matters. It wasn't long before the Duke began to realize what an extraordinary man Lanfranc was, and what a great asset he could be to William with his calm grasp of important issues. So deeply in tune with William's thoughts, his crystal clear logic, and his profound wisdom. No doubt, deep called to deep, the Avatar recognized Avatar, as images from past lives spent serving God together were resurrected in each of their minds. At any rate, it became clear to William that he had acted too precipitously in banishing this monk. From now on, he told Lanfranc, I will no longer take another's word against you. But if I have any questions, I will ask you directly. The Duke rescinded his banishment charge then and there. He also reimbursed Beck Abbey for its losses due to the burning of its farm, and then some. After an embrace affirming their friendship, William sent the prior back to Beck, once again riding slowly on his nag. From then on, the Duke began to involve Lanfranc more and more in affairs of state, relating first to those of Normandy and then to the Kingdom of England. Anyway, he goes on to explain then what great works Sri Yukteswarji did. But also it's very interesting, Master said that Sri Yukteswarji's love in this life was of a silent nature. He felt it for God also inwardly, and for others also. He chose not to speak about it. For example, Master himself, towards the end of his life in 1936, asked Sri Yukteswarji that, "Sir, I remember years ago when I was a little boy, I came to your ashram. On the very first day you told me once, I love you." And he says, "All these years you have never said those words to me again. My mortal years are aching." And Sri Yukteswarji said, "Must I bring out those warm sentiments of a wordless heart into the cold realm of of my voice?" And my master asked yes, and Sri Yukteswarji offered his love. But it is very interesting, it is very good for us to remember that this bond that exists between Guru and disciple. And for a God-realized master, that love is there for everybody, that it exists on many, many deep levels than we are familiar to. And Sri Yukteswarji, I also sometimes wonder, how many incarnations they must have been coming. Swami Ananda had a thought that they probably are soulmates. And he says that their natures were so different, but in their commitment to God, he says they were very firm and very much alike. And I think he says that's why they have been, in this particular life, been so close to fulfill this work of God. So let's keep him in our mind over this week. Also, let us remember that promise that is made in the Bhagavad Gita, that when we are ready, you see, how do we become ready? We may often think of the saints also historically that they have died, which is never the case. Just last week I was sharing with somebody that to test this theory of does a saint listen to us, I once prayed to a saint who was not even from our path. And I said, it was a very impossible situation. I said, please make it work and I will know. I just had 5-7 minutes before this could be sorted out. And before I had reached the destination, everything was miraculously, totally differently sorted out. And in my heart, when a prayer is answered, you also feel the response in your heart. I said, my God, if a saint who is not even related directly, as if saints they're related to everybody, but if it works through different channels beyond our line of gurus, how much more is their presence in our lives? And I think having Sri Yukteswar ji next to us is a very important for our spiritual progress. I mean, think of the progress Master made. We like to be like him, but I think that we should also be willing to go through some of what Master went through, the transformation, through the love that was offered by his Guru. And I truly believe that is the only way. The Bhagavad Gita warns us that man often tries to bring the truth down to a level which is convenient for him. Swami says that is the death of discipleship. He says, if anything, you should be praying, how can I raise the bar further and further? And that happens. Swamiji, somebody asked him, what is your daily prayer? He says, Lord, I am thine, be thou mine, thy will be done. He says, every morning I have never lived for myself. I ask for thy will be done. And that you cannot otherwise understand even Swamiji's life. But if you see some of the events of his life, given certain time that has now passed, you can understand why that might have happened for the benefit of somebody or for a group or the understanding of a certain culture or people. So let's meditate on the life of Sri Yukteswar in the times to come with that attitude. Master bless you.